If you were to ask me who I considered to be my favorite author of all time, I believe I would have to say Cormac McCarthy. Uh, he has never disappointed me as a writer. I love, or at least like, all of his books, or at least all the ones I've read. I haven't read every last book by him, but I have read the majority. And I, I've loved, or at least liked, them all to some degree. There are some I like more than others, but he's never disappointed me. I believe that his prose is some of the most gorgeous that I've ever read, and he is a writer that I've always admired, and, well, more than admired, I adore. I love me some Cormac McCarthy. He really is. Now, it's not to say that he has written the book that is the book that I consider to be my all time number one favorite is not a McCarthy book, but one of his books is not too is not is one of his books is not too far behind. This is not that book. This is a video of me trying to shine a light on what I consider to be Cormac McCarthy's most underrated book, and that is The Crossing, the second book in his Border trilogy. Uh, the book that precedes this book, All the Pretty Horses, is much more widely known and much more widely discussed. It won him the National Book Award, and it was the book that it became a national bestseller, and it broke him through to the mainstream. It got him more sales than any of his previous books had done, and it got him more attention than any of his books had done. I think that was in like 91 or 92. This book came out like 95, I want to say. And this book is never talked about at all. But I consider it so much better than All the Pretty Horses. And that is not at all to say that I don't like All the Pretty Horses. Like I said at the beginning, I love, or at least like, all of his books, and I love All the Pretty Horses. That's a dope book. There's nothing wrong with that. Uh, all I'm saying is that I consider this book to be better than that one, and yet it never gets talked about. So what I want to do here today is show a little love to a book that I feel does not get enough. And that is The Crossing by Cormac McCarthy. Uh, I I I said that this was the second book in his Border trilogy, which is All the Pretty Horses, The Crossing, and Cities of the Plain. But you don't have to read them in any particular order. Each book, well, the book one is about John Grady Cole and his exploits in Mexico. This book is about Billy Parham and his exploits in Mexico, and then the third book is them together. So this is a completely independent story to All the Pretty Horses. Don't think that you have to read that one to read this one. It is a perfectly contained standalone experience. But this book is well, I won't say that it's the bleakest thing that he's ever written. That would be The Road. Definitely, that book will stain your very soul. This book is not that bleak, but it is, I think, the most melancholic thing that he's ever written. The Road is bleak, as in, like, there's no hope in sight. Humanity is almost extinct, and people are eating each other. Like, it's bleak. But this book, I think, is the most melancholic thing, in that it's not as loud in its depression as the Road, but it lingers. It's a lingering. it leaves a taste in your mouth of it leaves a taste in your mouth of failure and sadness, and that is directly at odds with the preceding book, All the Pretty Horses, which is not really that book's not really meant to be a happy story, but it's not really depressing. Bad things happen in that book, but ultimately it's a little more positive. John Grady Cole is he's very adept at a lot of things. He's very capable. He doesn't really mess up that much. He does make some poor choices, but he never really makes out and out mistakes. It's much more action packed. There, it's probably McCarthy's most writing direct like action. There's more gunplay in it and everything. It's more exciting, and there's romance in it. There's that romance. It's one of the few times that McCarthy really tackled romance and did it pretty well, I think. But there's that, and it's more of an upbeat experience than this book, because this book is really and truly just it is profoundly sad, and it leaves a taste in your mouth of sadness. But I argue that taste lingers longer than whatever taste all the pretty horses will leave you with. Because while I love that book, this one means a lot more to me. I do not consider this McCarthy's best book. We all know what McCarthy's best book is. It's not, and I don't need to address that one here. This book is just what I consider his most underrated because it never gets talked about at all. And I'm going to tell you why. So if you uh, if you can consider All the Pretty Horses to be more of a success story, in that it's about a young teenager who goes to Mexico and works on a ranch and uh, wins the heart of the ranch owner's daughter. Although ultimately some bad things happen as a result of that, but he's really good at his job and he's really dashing and gallant. If you think that book is, if that book is that, this book is the polar opposite. This book is This book is a series of one failure after another. If John Grady Cole succeeds at his endeavors in All the Pretty Horses, Billy Parham, who is the protagonist of this book, fails at every single thing that he does. But I love this book so much because I think that, and I think if you really analyze it, you might agree with me. I think that I think that failure is more interesting to read about than success. Um, you might disagree with that, but I think if you gave it some real reflection, you might see what I mean by that. Some of the most gripping and engaging stories, and some of the stories that linger with us the longest, don't involve success, they involve failure. Failure is something that more people can relate to than success, because more people fail than succeed. Um, Failure is much more the universal experience than success. Um, like take the movie in the, well, not the book so much that it's based upon, but the movie, the 2004 sports classic Friday Night Lights. Take that movie. Um, you know, if you were familiar with the book upon which that movie is based, or the events which transpired that the book recounts, you knew that they were not going to win that championship. You knew that they weren't. What you were watching was just a prolonged setup to a massive letdown, a massive failure, and yet it is considered one of the finest sports movies of recent memory. And they fail at the end. They lose. Um, if you look at, I mean, look at Christopher Nolan's movie, The Dark Knight. Batman doesn't save Rachel in that. The love of his life, he does not save her in that movie. She dies. He fails. Failure lingers with us. failure, I think, moves us a little bit more than success because, again, so many of us can relate to failure, and there are more examples than just what I've given. I'm just giving some examples of some prominent. I'm giving some prominent examples of what I see as examples of how failure moves us a little bit more than success, sometimes at least. So, if All the Pretty Horses is about success, this book is about failure. Billy Parham is not John Grady Cole by any means. Well, let me explain what the book is about. This book is a pretty long book. It's a 400 something pages, I think, or thereabouts. And I've heard this book described, and I will not contest this. I've heard this book described as it's divided into 3 or 4 parts. I want to say 4. I've heard it described as a novella and then some novelettes tacked on to that novella, because part 1 of this book reads like its own little story, like it is basically a novella, and then the rest of the book is just following up on that. So what is the book about? It takes place concurrently with All the Pretty Horses in the exact same time period. No. It actually takes place prior to All the Pretty Horses. All the Pretty Horses takes place in I think it's 1949 or 1950, after World War II. This book takes place prior to World War II, and then World War II actually happens towards the end of this book. So it's actually kind of I don't want to call it a prequel because it has no bearing on that other book at all, but it takes place prior to the events of that book. Billy Parham lives on a ranch in New Mexico with his dad and his mom and his brother Boyd. And there are wolves that are killing some of their cattle, so they have to trap these wolves. And Billy one day traps this she-wolf in one of their steel traps. And instead of shooting it, he decides, since there are so few wolves around anymore, he's going to take this wolf back to Mexico and set it free. He's going to go across the border from New Mexico into Mexico and take the wolf home. Not the easiest undertaking to harness and travel with a wild, bloodthirsty animal, but he does it. Now, this is the part where things can you have to suspend your disbelief just a little bit. Because the people in Billy's life do not really make the sanest choices. Billy's choice to do this is arguably insane to begin with, but he on his way out of the state, he meets these other people, some of whom he knows that know his family, and they're like, "Where are you going?" He's like, "I'm going to Mexico with this wolf." And they're like, "Oh, okay, take care. I won't tell your parents." I mean, I don't know of anybody who would let a 16, I think he's 16 in this book. I don't know of anybody who would let a 16-year-old just do this without a word of protest. But if you can suspend your disbelief a little bit with that, you're going to love this book. So he takes the wolf to Mexico, and he bonds with this wolf on an innate level. He comes to the wolf and him have this kind of mutual respect and almost affection on his part, at least. And so he promises the wolf that he's going to get the wolf. By the way, there are spoilers in this, as with nearly all of my videos. If you don't want this book spoiled, then check out now, because I'm about to spoil this thing big time. But anyway, so he promises the wolf that he's going to, because she's pregnant. She has little puppies inside her. The wolf, what are wolves called, puppies? Little wolflets inside her, I guess. So he promises her that he's going to take her home because he sees himself as this guardian of her, kind of, and he's going to take her home. He's going to let her go, and she's going to be happy and have her little litter of wolf puppies. and everything's going to be good. And you think because you've seen stories with a similar theme to this, because you've been exposed to stories that have a similar bent to this one, that this is all going to work out. It doesn't. It works out in the worst possible way, in the most heartbreaking way. Um, the ending to part one of this book, the ending to the first section of this book, will break you. It broke me. So he gets to Mexico with this wolf, and then he runs into these villagers who take the wolf off of his hands and put the wolf in this dog fighting pit to fight like pit bulls and Airedales and everything. Uh, yeah, he doesn't portray. I've never been to Mexico. I don't want to sound culturally insensitive or anything, but he does not portray either in this book or in All the Pretty Horses. Mexico is not portrayed as a really pleasant place. I don't know how accurate that is, or at least maybe around this time period, maybe it was. So they take the wolf and they put the wolf in this pit to fight other dogs, and they won't give the wolf back. And so he ultimately has to make the choice to kill the wolf to spare her the agonizing death of being torn apart by these Airedales. And so he kills the wolf, and it's basically just him. Um, it's like a grittier version of Old Yeller. It's him killing a part of himself with the dog, with the wolf, and it is like McCarthy is more of a writer who likes to deal with. He likes to paint images with his prose more. He never gives us any kinds of insight into the characters' thought processes. Um, I think Suttree is the only book where he actually writes what the characters think. Otherwise, you just hear what they say and you see what they do, but you don't get any kind of insight into their mind. But and you don't in this book either. But this book nonetheless packs an emotional punch that many of his other books don't. And that's not a knock on McCarthy. Obviously, I'm not knocking him. I introduced this video by saying he's my favorite writer, but I will acknowledge that he's really not one who likes to deal with emotions or anything like that. He's more of an idea. He's more one to deal with ideas and paint really vivid pictures with his prose. But this book packs an emotional punch that I was not expecting, and they just keep coming. Like just when you think it can't get any more heartbreaking, it does. It's just one failure and misadventure after another, and so Billy has to kill the wolf, and it kills a part of him, and then he kind of loses his mind a little bit, and he just wanders around Mexico on his horse, like a wild man, and he meets up with a lot of this book is just Billy meeting people and them talking about life and them giving him their philosophies on life and existence, which McCarthy this is partly why I love McCarthy so much, because he has an ability that no other writer that I've ever come across has to put such grandiloquent um, concepts and speech and ideas into the mouths of such illiterate and um, uncouth characters, and yet it never sounds um, incongruous. Like there are characters in this book that like they're just these hermits that live in the middle of nowhere, and they talk about like religion and faith and life and death and such, and they talk about these incredibly deep philosophical things, and they do it in an elevated, high level, highbrow manner. But it never feels forced or awkward. Like you can believe that they're saying these things, and that's partly why I love McCarthy so much. And so a lot of this book is just Billy meeting people. Like there's really no plot to it. He just wanders around and meets people, and they talk about life and stuff. And there's lots of the writing in this book. This is the book where McCarthy cranks his writing up to the max. With a normal McCarthy book, you get um, he's noted that he uses it's kind of just plain, simple declarative writing, except when it's not. Like he'll write these simple, short sentences, and then every now and then they gradually segue into a really elaborate, breathtakingly gorgeous metaphor or passage of exquisite beauty. Uh, this book is where he cranks it up to 11, and I think he actually did go a little too far with this. Like there were times in this book where the writing actually got a little distracting. It's not like in All the Pretty Horses or The Road or anything, or No Country for Old Men. It's not like those books where the writing is it's 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 gorgeous, but it never asserts itself above the story. In this book, it did in some places where I was like, okay, we get it. He harped on things, especially actually it happens in like the first few pages where he's describing the scene, and he just keeps on and keeps on and keeps on, and the language gets progressively more inscrutable, and I'm like, okay, we get it, McCarthy, just move on. You're going overboard with this. But that only happens a few times in this book. But I will say that this is the book I think where he went a little bit. He took the writing a little bit too far, just a little bit. It got a little distracting at times, but just a few times, just a few. But anyway, so after Billy kills the wolf, he kind of loses his mind a little bit, and he wanders around Mexico like a wild man, living in the woods and everything. And then he eventually comes back to New Mexico in America and discovers that his parents have been murdered and all their horses stolen. Um, and his brother Boyd living with this other person. So he gets his brother, and they go back to Mexico to get the horses that were stolen because I think they were stolen. They were sold in Mexico. Yet again, this is another example of why are you thinking like this? Like the choices these characters make are bizarre. There's no rationale. There's no rationale behind any of it. There's no reasoning. Like you're two kids. You're like 16 and 15. Your parents are dead. You're probably going to lose the ranch that you own. Yet all your assets have vanished, but you're going to Mexico to get these horses back. You're two kids by yourself. You can't run a ranch. I'm sorry. You're going to Mexico to get these horses back, and then what? That is the question that you need to ask when reading this book. And then what are you going to do? Because that's what these characters don't ask apparently. But anyway. So they go to Mexico to get the horses back, and then things just go wrong, and they meet this Mexican girl who they save. They save this Mexican girl from getting raped by these two guys, and then she's like indebted to them, and she kind of there's this the girl that they save falls in love with Billy's brother Boyd, and Boyd eventually gets shot, and then if he recovers, and then he and the girl run off together, and then I think that's part. I think there's four parts to this. All of this happens between parts 2 and 3. Boyd gets shot, and then he gets better, and then him and his new Mexican girlfriend ditch Billy, and they just ride off and do their own thing. And so now Billy's alone again. Why would you do that? We don't know why you left him, because none of these choices really make sense. Like it sounds like I'm degrading this book because I don't like how the characters' choices are kind of insane. But I'm not. The choices that these characters in this book make are strange to say the least. But it's not. It doesn't detract. Like this is a phenomenal book. I consider this the strongest of the Border trilogy. Like this is the best one in my opinion. But it's underrated. Nobody ever talks about it, and I don't know why. I guess because All the Pretty Horses won the National Book Award, and this one didn't. But this one I think is the best of the three. But Billy returns to America, but then he learns that with none of the horses that they went to get. If I'm remembering correctly, they don't get any of the horses. So they get shot, or Boyd gets shot, and then they don't even get what they went after. So Billy returns to America, but then eventually he learns that his brother, who remained in Mexico, has been killed. So he goes back to Mexico yet again. Like, this book is called The Crossing, but it should be called The Crossings, plural, because there are a lot of crossings into Mexico and America. So Billy returns to Mexico yet again to retrieve the body of his brother to bring back to America to bury. This is a choice I can actually understand. So he returns to Mexico. He digs up his brother's body. Um, and then he meets with some bandits who rob him and desecrate his brother's bones, and nearly kill his horse. And so, yes, he yet again tragedy strikes. But he eventually, with the help of some gypsy people, he eventually nurses this horse back to health. He loads his brother's now scattered bones back up in a bag and takes them back to America, and he buries them. And I'm not going to spoil the ending to this book because I can't. Me telling you what happens would not do it justice. The ending to this book is one of the most heartbreaking. Maybe it is the most heartbreaking ending I've ever read. Like, if you thought, like I said, the ending to part one broke me, where he had to kill the wolf. Uh, that did break me, but the ending to this book overall, that destroyed me. And I think it may to you too if you give this book a chance. So I'm not going to tell you how this book ultimately ends. Just know that it is um, devastating. Like, the ending to this book is devastating. It's not a happy ending because this is not a happy story. This is one of the most profoundly melancholic stories I've ever read. It's not as bleak and harrowing as The Road. That book is on another level. And like I said, that book will stain your very soul. This book won't do that, but it will leave an aftertaste in your mouth of sadness and melancholy. And it lingers a long time. It lingers with me still now. And I read this book 6 months or seven, actually about a year ago. It's been about a year since I read this book. And it is, I can still remember my reaction upon reading the last sentence of this book, reading that ending. I was broken. It devastated me. This is McCarthy's. I would argue that this is McCarthy's most emotional. No. The Road probably is his most emotionally effective book, with the father son, with the relationship between the father and son. Yes, that book is probably his most powerful in the emotional sense. But this is a close second. This is a close second, and I think it is more universal than The Road because we all deal with failure. If there is a central thesis to my ramblings in this video, it is that this book is about failure, and well, it's about a lot of things, but failure chief amongst them. This book is something that I think we can all relate to because everybody fails at some point in their life, and and failure, I think, is more effective to read or watch than success because more people fail than succeed. And so that's why I think we get movies like Friday Night Lights where it's ultimately about failure. You know they're not going to win, and yet it's still one of the most gripping, moving uh, sports movies that you can watch, even though you know they're going to lose. Um, this book is very much this book is very much like that. It is a it is a heartbreaking series of one failure after another, one tragedy after another, but it doesn't ever feel like like I mentioned in my video about Lightning by Dean Koontz. I don't like it when people just saddle um, when authors just saddle a protagonist with tragedy after tragedy. It works in this book because the tragedies are as a result of the decisions that the characters make. It's not just thrust upon them like they choose it, because they make these incredibly odd decisions that don't ever pan out. And like we as readers can see that they're really not going to pan out, but it doesn't hit us any less hard when it happens because we understand what they're trying to do, and when they don't ultimately accomplish it. Like this book, I don't think Billy actually accomplishes one thing in this book. Like I don't think he actually. The only thing he actually succeeds in doing is getting his dead brother's bones to take back to America. Other than that, he doesn't succeed at a single thing in this book, and yet it's still one of the most um, moving things that McCarthy has ever given us. And so it is. And so in summation, it is for that. It is in summation for that reason that I consider this to be the strongest book in the Border trilogy. Not McCarthy's best book by any means, but it is the best book I consider of those three books that comprise the Border trilogy. And it is, I think, his most underrated book this book needs some love, people. Like this book, no one ever talks about this book, and it's amazing. They talk about, no, like, when you talk about Cormac McCarthy, you get thanks due in large part to the amazing film adaptation. A lot of people still talk about No Country for Old Men. A lot of people still talk about No Country for Old Men, but they don't. And The Road, because that won the Pulitzer, and All the Pretty Horses, because that won the National Book Award. But nobody talks about this book. Nobody like it. I'm sometimes I think I'm like the only person that remembers this book exists. So please, if you have ever considered yourself a fan, if you have ever considered yourself if you have ever at any time in your reading career considered yourself a fan of Cormac McCarthy, you owe it to yourself to read this book and um, experience this book because it will move you, it will change you, and it will devastate you by the end. So read it, please. Give this book some much needed love because it doesn't get enough. And So, if you have read The Crossing, let me know what you thought in the comments. If you agree with my take on it in this video, if you don't, let me know your thoughts and your opinions. I'd love to hear them. And as always, remember to like and subscribe. And until next time, goodbye.